The other day I went up to Blackgates Engineering and bought some bits and pieces for the Stuart major beam engine rebuild. This is part 18, mahogany work on the base, but there are other things in it. You may have noticed there is a new bottle of Loctite stuff. It's Loctite 638, and I'm assured by Matt at Blackgates that it's stronger than 603, so that's a good thing. What I'm doing at the moment is fairly obvious. I'm cleaning the metal parts of the connecting rod. And as I mentioned in the last episode, it's the best way to do it. The paint isn't wet anymore, and you can get a really clean line between the metal and the paint, even on cast iron, which indeed this is made from. While I've got the sandpaper in my hand, I'm going to clean up the edge of the beam as well. Whilst doing this, I noticed I'd missed a couple of bits of it, but I'm going to give it another coat anyway. The cast iron on this beam is quite porous, and the paint had soaked in certain areas. But another coat of the Crimson Lake paint will put that right. Now it's time to move on to what this episode is really about. The episode is about making the mahogany parts for the top of the wooden base. I basically had two choices. I was going to try and be very clever and fit the mahogany part around the bed plate. I even went as far as to attempt this with a piece of scrap mahogany, by lifting the bed plate, putting a piece of mahogany under the bed plate and drawing round the bed plate. But in the end, common sense prevailed, and I came to the conclusion it was much easier to use a larger, deeper piece of mahogany and sit the bed plate on the mahogany itself, which is firmer than the softwood that the base is made out of. Here I'm still messing about with the original idea, and as you can see, it would have taken quite a bit of doing, cutting around the bearing mounting. It was a nice idea, but I'm not that clever at woodwork. So instead I went with Plan B, the sensible option. And for this engine, which is not exactly small, the sensible option appears to be cut two pieces of mahogany longer than I need them, so there's enough to go down each side of the base and across each end. I always like to try things in place to see how they look, scale-wise. It's very easy to get something big and clumsy that makes the engine look bad. So I thought 1/8 of an inch thick is about right here. It seems to look the correct size for the bed plate. I spent quite a long time with some sandpaper, rounding the edges. It's very important with things like this not to use sharp edges of mahogany or any kind of wood, because the first thing that's going to happen is you're going to drop something on it which will dint it, or worse, it may splinter and you may get a big splinter in your finger. So once the edges of the mahogany were rounded, I trapped them under the bed plate, and I used another piece of mahogany which was slightly less than 1/8 to gauge it so there was a nice overhang all the way round. And then whilst holding the bed plate, I drilled through the holes 3/16 of an inch. I did of course only drill the mahogany 3/16 of an inch, not all the way down. This clip shows me making one of the end pieces. The bed plate is fastened to the wood now, not tightly, just with a couple of locating 2BA bolts. Then I took one of the offcuts of the mahogany, which was already of course rounded, made a mark on it, used a set square to make sure the line was square, and cut it on the bandsaw, and it fits quite well. I did of course have to round the ends of the two longitudinal pieces to match the rounded part of the pieces at each end. Even with the mahogany just placed in position and not varnished or anything, it's looking quite good now. I think I've got the scale just about right. I need to make a decision on what to do about the corners. I did get some brass for this, but it might just look a little bit 1960s, so I will probably use a mahogany theme on the corners, but using thinner mahogany than is round the top. It's time now to have a quick look at the cylinder and the piston. I'm not convinced with this piston. When I first ran this engine, and I actually made a video about it, not the first one of this episode, it's a video about how not to buy steam engines. And when I first ran it, I did notice that the piston was blowing badly, so I may have to do something about this. But for the moment, thanks for watching and I hope you found it useful.